All right, so now we're going to bring the bodice back. We're going to actually sew one of the collars onto this neck. So I'm going to choose the convertible collar because that one came out prettier. This one, like I said, I'm real bugged about this wonkiness, so I'm not going to use that one. But it was nice to be able to show you how to sew that. So I'm going to use the convertible. Okay. So now it doesn't matter what collar you do sew on, setting the collar is exactly the same. So what we're going to do is you're going to lay the bodice, we're going to set the facings aside right now. We're going to lay the bodice on the table so it's face up, okay? Now, I want you to notice that notch right here, that's center back notch, okay? So we want the top collar to face up. So the under collar is going to face down, just like this. So I'm laying the under collar so it's these double notches are right along, or I should say the single notch is in between the double notches evenly, just like that. And then I'm just going to lay that right on top of each other. Okay, so those notches are going to match. So my top collar is facing up. My under collar is facing down towards the body of my shirt, and that is facing up. Okay, so I'm going to take a pin. And here's another thing that is so much easier, is when you pin up and down like this, okay? When you pin sideways, which everybody seems to pin sideways, it's hard to maneuver it. It doesn't turn real well, okay? It's got too much in the way. Where here, I can just pin up and down and then just line up my shoulders. So now I'm going to line the shoulder notch with the shoulder seam right on top. Make sure they match, and again, pin up and down. Okay, so now in the middle here, you see there's no resistance because I don't have any pins going sideways. And for some reason, that seems to be a problem when you start sewing, and then you end up with tucks and pleats and a mess. So again, this is a little secret that my sample sewers showed me when I was in the industry. I used to work side by side with a sample sewer as a pattern maker is what you do. And that lady taught me tons. Okay, so now this notch right here is center front. And this is your extension. So the collar is going to set right at center front. The mandarin collar is going to do the exact same thing. Okay, so we're going to set the edge of the collar right at that notch, and we're going to pin up and down. Okay, all right, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to match the shoulder with the shoulder notch, lay it right on top, pin, then match the edge of the collar with that notch right here and pin. All right, now here's another trick that I learned is technically what we want to do is we want to sew on this side, okay, because we can see it. Well, here's the problem. This collar is not moving, okay? It's pretty rigid, but yet this is bias, and so it's going to stretch. So when we start sewing, then all of a sudden it's stretched, and then you've got these like pleats and tucks, and you're like, why doesn't my neck match? Okay, same thing with the back. Something about this feed dog I want to tell you about. See this? This is called a feed dog, and I mentioned it before. what happens is when the needle is going up and down, this is moving back and forth. And what it's doing is it's feeding the fabric through, so it just runs through. That's how it works, okay? That feed dog also works as a way of keeping this fabric that's stretchy and that's bias here to not stretch, so that it lays into the neck nicely. Okay, so I'm going to start sewing with the collar facing up and my neck at the bottom. I'm going to start, and the seam allowance is 1/4, so I'm going to start right here. Okay, just a few stitches, then I'm going to take that pin out. Now, before I start sewing anymore, I want you to notice something. My neck is not even, do you see? See, that's not even. So what I need to do is just make sure that the seam is even where I'm sewing. And also making sure that I don't have any tucks or pleats underneath or half of my shirt sewed up under there. Okay, and I'm going to sew my 1/4. Now I need to adjust again. So I stop. I'm going to make sure the raw edges are all lined up. Make sure that my shoulder seams are still open. And I'm going to sew. Now I get to the shoulder, I'm going to stop again and readjust. Okay, again, I want to make sure that those raw edges are even, that they're laying right on top of each other, the neck and the collar. There's no tucks or pleats underneath. It's all nice and flat. And sew. Okay, again, line it up. I'm going to sew all the way to the shoulder notch again and stop. Now I'm going to readjust, get all that out of the way, make sure that this is laying flat and keeping those raw edges of the neck here right on top of the raw edge of the collar. So they're right on top. And don't pull, just let it lay there flat. Okay, pull the pin out before you sew over it, and then finish. Okay, now when you go, you don't want to go any further now. What you want to do is turn it over on this side. And I want you to notice, do you see how you've got some, do you see how it did stretch and you have a little bit of ease sewed in there? So that just pulled that ease right in without causing any tucks or pleats or anything on the other side. See? It's all flat. Okay? So that's the easiest way to do this. Okay, now we've sewed the collar onto the bodice. The next step is sewing the facing onto the bodice and the collar. Okay, so this I learned teaching the class last quarter was very confusing for the students. And so I'm going to try to make this pretty clear, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to lay your bodice on the table with the collar laying flat just like this. Okay, there's your back neck, here's your shoulders, all of it is just laying flat like that. Okay? Now you're going to take your facing. Okay, and this is where it got confusing. That students were like, I don't get it. And so I'm going to I'll show you. Here's where they got confused. When I say lay the center back neck with center back neck, okay, that matches. But then they're like, but I don't understand why this is going this way here, and this is going that way. Okay, yes, don't worry about it. Right now, what I want you to do is match up the center back notch with the center back notch and pin so that the facing is, or I should say the collar is sandwiched between the body and the facing. And this is laying just like this. So it does look weird. All right? So once you've got that pinned, now lift it up and just let this whole thing drape. Okay, so now that it's draping, look, now it matches. It's not doing this weird thing. See, I'm just lining it up. So now I'm going to match the shoulder seam with the shoulder notch on the collar. And I'm going to pin up and down. Then I'm going to match that center front notch with the center front notch and pin. Okay, same thing on the other side. Okay, again, just to show you guys, this was very confusing. Okay, this looks wrong, but it's not, because now I'm just going to just straighten out that seam, this here, and line the shoulders together. Okay, I line the shoulders together with the shoulder notch of the collar and pin. Okay, and then I'm matching the notch here with the notch. At the center and pin. Okay. All right, so now I can start sewing this, start top stitching. Okay, now what I'd like to do is just flip it over so that I'm sewing on this side so that my facing now is on the table. My facing on the table, and then that's where I can see this stitch, so I can just sew right on top of that stitch again. Okay? So I'm going to start now. What I'm going to do though is start at the very edge here. Okay, not at the notch. I'm going to start right at the edge. I'm going to back tack. That's important. Okay, and then I'm going to take the pin out. Again, I'm going to adjust so that the raw edge of the facing is right on top of the rest of the neck. And I'm going to sew a quarter seam. Make sure that matches, and I don't have any folds or pleats underneath. It's nice and flat. If you don't sew exactly on the stitch that you just did before, don't worry about it. Okay, so I'm going to sew and then take the pin out. Just sew a little bit. Now I need to, again, readjust. Now I want you to see something. If I keep sewing and don't look, see how that's folded? That means that's going to sew over that and make this great big tuck. I don't want that. So what I need to do is I need to get in there and just kind of move that over. You can see what I'm doing here. Just kind of, it was like this, so now I'm just moving it over. Okay? And then again, I need to notice that it's not matching. So now I still need to pull the facing seam up so that it matches. So now all the seams are right on top of each other. Okay, again, I'm going to do the same thing. I want to make sure that there's a great big fold right there. We don't want that. So I'm going to get underneath here and just kind of pull that to the side to get that flat. And make sure that the seams are on top of each other here. Okay, I'm going to take a look again. I want to make sure there's no tucks or pleats. And I'm going to make sure the seams are right on top of each other. You can feel that there's a bump. If you feel a bump, that means there's some type of a pleat under there, a tuck that you don't want. So you want to smooth that out. Okay, now I'm going to go around. I want to line that up. I'm going to go all the way to this end here and back tack. Okay, so now my facing is on. So I'm going to take a look at if there's any tucks or pleats. I have a little one right there. I think that could be pressed out. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so now you'll see that this is the inside of my garment. So notice that it's all nice and clean, my clean edge here. This is my neck. There's my collar, folds back. Okay. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do on the collar and the neck is we're going to do some understitching, because here's what happens is when I fold this over, this tends to like flip up like that, and it doesn't really lay flat. So when I do some understitching here from shoulder to shoulder, that's going to make that lay nice and flat. Okay, so here's how to do this. You're going to open up. This is now, the print is face up. This is my back. This is face up. My facing is also face up. My collar is standing straight up. Okay? So what I'm going to do is fold the collar, or just lay the collar so it's laying on top of the back, so that the only thing that is towards this side is your facing and your seam allowance. See, there's the seam allowance. Okay? So we're going to start at the shoulder, right here at that shoulder seam, and we're going to do an edge stitch. Now the edge stitch that we're doing is on the facing, so where my pencil line is, right on the facing here is where the stitching is going to be. And what that's going to do is it's going to stitch to the facing and the seam allowance, but not the back of the bodice. Okay, so I'm going to go under here. Okay, so now I'm going to just start at the shoulder, and I'm going to do my little edge stitch. I want to keep this nice and flat. Okay, so I kind of want to pull on it so it's flat. And I'm just going to edge stitch that all the way across. And I'm going to end at the shoulder on this side, the shoulder seam on this side. Just right there. Okay? So that's where you end. And you don't have to back tack. Trim the threads. Okay, so now you'll notice that how easily that lays when I fold my collar. Look how nice and flat that lays, and I haven't even pressed it yet. Once I start pressing, then it's even going to lay better. So that helps it to lay nice and flat right there. Okay, the last thing that we're going to do on our bodice is we're going to sew the facing to the front. So again, we got to flip this over. So we're laying the facing on top of the bodice, again, face to face, print side to print side. So the fusing is going to be facing up. Okay, and we're going to sew a quarter seam. So what I want to do is I want to start at the neck and sew down. I never want to start at the bottom and sew up, because if for some reason my body is bigger than my facing, then you're going to find this big tuck right here. So we're going to start at the neck, and we're going to sew a quarter seam. Again, right here, you're going to back tack. Okay, you want to make sure that your facings are right on top of each other, nice and even. Okay, and then just back tack at the other end. Okay, again, I'm going to cut that corner again. Okay, because I'm going to turn this right side up and I want that to be a nice sharp point. So I'm going to trim that corner again, just like that. So when I go to turn this right side up, I have this nice pretty point. You have your extension. This is center front. Here's your extension and that nice sharp point. Okay, and then we're going to do the understitching again. So just like you did when you did the for the sewing notebook, that little shirt that you put the facing on and then you sewed a pocket to it, same thing. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to fold the seam allowance so it's on top of the facing. Now, because of the fusing, it's automatically wanting to fold the opposite way. Fold it so it's on top of the facing, just like that. Okay. Then we're going to do our understitching again. So again, we're only sewing on the seam allowance and the facing, not the body. We're going to do a little edge stitch. While you're doing this, make sure that this is flat and that this is folded over to the facing. Okay, and then remember how we had to like sew into that cup that I talk about when we're sewing the facing to that little bodice for the sewing notebook? Same thing. Okay, we can't go all the way, but we're going to go as close as we can. Okay, so I'm not going to go any further than that. Okay. Okay, so then I want to clip my threads. Okay, so what that does is, you see how now it's laying nice and flat? And this is the inside. Okay, and then the outside, you don't see any top stitching. It's nice and pretty. Okay. You're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. We're just repeating the same thing. Again, fold so that the facing is on top of the bodice. and that it's face to face, so that you see the seam of the neck. And we start here and sew that quarter seam again. Back tack, and line your fabric, your pieces up so that the seams are even. And then back tack. Okay, again, we want to clip that corner. Get rid of all that mess right there. Turn this right side up. Make sure that's got a nice little sharp point there. Nice and pretty. Okay, and then next, understitching. So again, we're going to fold the seam allowance on top of the facing. Okay, fold the seam allowance on top of the facing and edge stitch. And when we edge stitch, we're always edge stitching close to the stitch, not the raw edge. Okay, pull this nice and flat. You're sewing into that cup again. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. It's good enough. Trim my threads. Okay, and that just lays nice and flat. Okay, when I'm finished, then I can go to the iron and I can press around the neck and get this nice and flat, press this nice and pretty, press this down. And the last thing on the bodice is we're going to sew the side seams together. So I'm going to place this face up. So this is my back and it's face up. And I'm going to fold the front so it's on top, face down. Okay, face down so I can see my darts. And I'm going to line up the side seams right here at the edge. And my seam allowance is going to be a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam, back tack. I'm going to sew down to the other side. Again, I want to make sure that my dart, the excess fabric of my dart is folding towards the waist, and it is. So I want to keep it there. And then back tack. Okay, we're going to do the other side. Same thing. The back of the bodice is facing up. The front of the bodice is going to face down on top of the side seams. Match up the side seams here, and where the notch is, again, that notch is telling me that this is a 1/2 inch seam and to sew this way. So that's what I'm going to do. Back tack. Match up the side seams here, and your dart is facing down towards the waist. That's correct. And then back tack. Okay. So this is finished. We're going to go to the iron, and I don't think I have to do that right now on a video. I'm just going to tell you. You're going to go to the iron, and you're going to take these side seams, and you're going to press them open, just like you did the shoulder. Okay? You're just going to press those seams open. like that, on this side seam, and the other side seam, press your facing down so it's nice and flat and pretty, the neck, and just make it real nice. The next video is going to be sewing the sleeves.